Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories, subscribe my YouTube channel. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. It started with an engine light flickering on the dashboard, a warning that barely registered amid my growing exhaustion. I'd been driving for hours, the long delivery route stretching into endless miles of empty road, punctuated by the occasional shadow of a twisted tree or the fleeting silhouette of an animal darting into the brush. I hadn't planned to stop, just keep pushing through until the city limits, but the light grew brighter, blinking insistently like a dying heartbeat. And then the rain started. It came down in sheets, thick and suffocating, turning the world outside my windshield into a swirling blur of gray. The wipers struggled, smearing the water rather than clearing it, and I felt a twinge of panic as the road beneath me became slick with mud. That's when I saw the sign, barely legible under the weathered paint and moss. Welcome to Crescent Hollow. Population, 326. It was barely a blip on the map, a forgotten place swallowed by the surrounding woods. But I had no choice. I eased off the highway and into the town, my truck's tires crunching on gravel as I pulled onto a narrow main street. The buildings were low and sagging, their windows dark except for a single flicker of yellow light coming from a diner. Above it, a faded sign swung in the wind, Millie's Place. I parked and stepped out into the rain, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something faintly metallic. I shook it off and hurried inside, the doorbell chiming weakly as I entered. Inside, the diner was dimly lit and smelled of coffee and old grease. A few locals sat hunched over their mugs, eyes flicking toward me but quickly looking away. The woman behind the counter, tall and wiry with gray hair coiled tightly at the nape of her neck, gave me a nod. "Looks like you got caught in the storm," she said, her voice low and scratchy. "Yeah. Truck's acting up. Any chance there's a mechanic in town?" I asked, glancing back through the window at the rain that continued to fall in thick, heavy sheets. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "You might try Hank. His shop's down the road. Won't be open till morning, though." I sighed and nodded. "Guess I'm stuck here for the night then?" "That's so," she said, her gaze lingering on me for just a second too long. "Well, there's a room above the diner if you need a place to stay. Nothing fancy, but it's dry." Grateful, I agreed. She handed me a tarnished key and pointed toward the narrow staircase at the back of the room. As I climbed, I noticed a faded poster pinned to the wall at the bottom of the stairs. It depicted a crooked tree with gnarled branches reaching like fingers into a starless sky. Beneath it, in peeling letters, were the words, "He waits beneath the hollow tree. Don't listen to the whispers." A shiver crawled down my spine, but I told myself it was just the storm and my tired mind playing tricks. The room was small, with a single bed, a battered dresser, and a window that rattled in the wind. I set down my bag and tried to settle in, but sleep wouldn't come. I found myself staring out the window, watching the rain batter the deserted street below. At some point I realized I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows across the street, partially obscured by the skeletal branches of a tree. It was motionless, facing the diner, its face hidden by a hood or perhaps the angle of the storm. I blinked, but when I looked again the figure was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the eerie ambience of this forgotten town. But as I turned away from the window I heard it. A faint whisper. It was so soft I almost thought it was the wind, but then it grew clearer, more insistent, threading through the cracks in the walls, coiling around my thoughts. "Don't listen. Don't listen. Don't listen." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing down on me like unseen hands. I reached for the lamp, but the light flickered and died, leaving me in darkness. Then the knocking started. It was slow at first, a gentle tap-tap-tap against the window. I turned toward it, my breath catching in my throat. The rain streaked down the glass, but there was no sign of anyone outside. I waited, muscles tense, listening. The knocking grew louder, more urgent, until it became a frantic pounding. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, and the whispers surged louder, a cacophony of voices all hissing the same words. "Don't listen. Don't listen. Don't listen." I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound pressed in from all sides, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the very air around me. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to echo in the stillness. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart hammering against my ribs, until finally the light flickered back on. The room was empty. The whispers were gone. I told myself it had to be the storm, the isolation, my exhausted mind conjuring phantoms. But deep down, I knew something was watching, waiting just beyond the edges of the light. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the floorboards, every moan of the wind outside felt like a warning. The hollow tree, the whispers, I shouldn't have listened. And yet, as the hours dragged on and the storm continued to rage, I couldn't help but wonder. What exactly was I being warned against? The storm finally eased as dawn crept into the sky, pale and uncertain. When I woke, it was to the sound of dripping water, the slow rhythmic tap of rainwater leaking through a crack in the ceiling above my head. My clothes were damp from where I'd collapsed on the bed, too exhausted to change out of them. My dreams, or nightmares rather, had been filled with whispers, endless muttering voices I couldn't quite make out, and shadowy figures darting just beyond my vision. I told myself it was the storm. The stress. I just needed some coffee and fresh air. Downstairs, the diner was empty except for the woman behind the counter. Millie, I assumed, who was wiping down the already clean surfaces. She glanced up as I approached and gave me a look that hovered somewhere between pity and wariness. "Rough night?" she asked. I gave a weak nod. "Didn't sleep much." "Hey, about last night?" I hesitated, feeling foolish, but I pushed on. "I thought I heard something." Whispering. Knocking at my window. "Probably nothing, but do you ever hear anything like that around here?" She paused, the rag in her hand motionless, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You should leave," she said quietly. "Before sunset." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the empty diner, then leaned in closer. "This town has rules. Folk tales, if you want to call them that. Stories passed down from when my grandmother was a girl. They say there's something in the woods around here. Something old. Something that doesn't like outsiders." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "The hollow tree," I murmured, recalling the faded poster. Millie nodded. "They say it waits. It watches. And if you hear it whispering, it means it's already seen you. Already marked you. The rule is simple, don't stay after sunset. But you did. Now you need to be careful." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, though her serious tone gnawed at me. "Look, I'm sure it's just old stories to scare kids. Ghost stories. I'll get my truck checked out and be on my way." She straightened, folding the rag in her hands. "You do that. But if you can't leave today, if something keeps you here, don't listen to the whispers. Whatever you do, don't follow them." I left the diner with her words echoing in my mind. Don't listen. Don't follow. Hank's shop was a squat brick building on the edge of town. An old man with thick glasses and grease-stained coveralls greeted me with a grunt and a nod. He agreed to take a look at my truck but warned it might take until the afternoon. I paced around the shop as he worked, my nerves taut and my gaze flicking toward the surrounding woods. The trees were dense here, their branches intertwined like tangled fingers. The air felt heavier the closer I got to the edge of town, a silence settling over me that wasn't quite natural. I heard a faint rustle behind me and turned, but no one was there. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, I heard it, a low, sibilant whisper like a voice carried on the wind. "Come see. Come see." I backed away quickly, but the sound seemed to follow me, threading its way through the trees and into my ears. I could feel the pull of it, soft and persuasive, urging me forward. My head throbbed, and for a moment I felt disoriented, like I was standing on the edge of a dream. I stumbled back toward Hank's shop, heart racing. When I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw shadows moving between the trees, dark shapes that twisted and coiled in ways no human figure ever could. By the time Hank called me over, I was shaking. "Your truck's got a cracked radiator," he said gruffly. "Needs a part one don't have. Couldn't order it until tomorrow at best." Tomorrow. Another night. I felt the weight of Millie's warning pressing down on me. "Is there any way to patch it up so I can get out of here today?" I asked desperately. He shook his head. "Not without risking a breakdown on the road. Better to wait." I left the shop with a sick feeling in my stomach. I could feel the town closing in around me, the trees leaning just a little too close, the shadows just a little too long. I had no choice but to stay another night. Back at the diner, Millie said nothing as I returned to my room. I sat by the window, watching as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, bleeding shadows across the empty streets. The light faded, and with it came a rising sense of dread. As darkness swallowed the town, the whispers returned. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the sigh of the wind. But soon they grew louder, clearer, curling around me like smoke. "Come see. Come see. Under the hollow tree. Come see." I tried to block them out, pressing my hands over my ears, but the voices pushed through, seeping into my thoughts. My limbs felt heavy, my mind clouded. I found myself standing, moving toward the door, drawn by the pull of something just outside the edges of my understanding. I stumbled down the stairs and into the street. The town was silent, deserted, save for the flickering lamplight and the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. My steps slowed as I neared the edge of town, where the woods loomed like a black wall. There, just within the treeline, I saw it. A massive, gnarled tree with a hollow at its base, dark and yawning like a mouth. The air around it shimmered faintly as though reality were bending. And within the hollow I thought I saw something moving, a shape too dark and indistinct to define. The whispers surged louder. "Come see. Come see." I stood there, heart pounding, torn between the pull of the whispers and the desperate urge to run. Behind me I thought I heard footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the direction of the diner. I turned, but the street was empty. When I looked back at the tree, the shadowy shape within the hollow had grown larger, closer, almost as if it were reaching for me. I stumbled backward, breaking free from whatever trance had held me. I turned and ran, the whispers trailing behind me like a dying breath. When I reached the safety of the diner's light, I collapsed against the door, gasping for air. I realized then that the folk tales weren't just stories. They were warnings. And I had already broken the rules. I barely slept that night, every creak of the floorboards or sigh of the wind outside making me jolt awake. When dawn finally painted the sky in bruised purples and grays, I stumbled downstairs, exhausted but relieved to see Millie behind the counter. Her face paled when she saw me, and she didn't even try to hide the dread in her eyes. "You went to the woods, didn't you?" she said softly. I hesitated. The memory of the hollow tree and the thing within it made my skin crawl. "I heard something. I don't know how to explain it, it was like I was being pulled." She sighed, shaking her head. "That's how it starts. You need to leave today." I felt the weight of her words settle into me, but Hank's voice echoed from the back of my mind. "The truck won't be ready today." My pulse quickened. "What happens if I don't leave?" Millie's lips thinned. "You'll be marked. Once you're marked, it doesn't stop. The whispers won't stop. You'll see things that shouldn't be there. It'll follow you until you're gone." "Marked?" I repeated, my voice low. "How do I know if I'm marked?" She glanced over my shoulder as if checking the empty diner for unseen eyes, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, cracked mirror. "Look at your reflection. If you see the mark, it means it's already chosen you." Heart hammering, I took the mirror from her and hesitated before raising it to my face. At first, it reflected my pale, sleep-deprived features, but then, just beneath my left eye, I saw it. A faint, twisting line, dark as ink, almost like a scar but shifting, almost alive. It writhed when I looked directly at it. I dropped the mirror with a strangled cry. "What is that?" She retrieved it quietly. "It's the mark of the hollow. Once you've seen it, it means it's already watching you. You can't stay. You need to get as far away from here as possible." I felt lightheaded. "But the truck. I'll get Hank to patch it even if it's risky." "You can't wait until nightfall. Go pack your things." I rushed back to my room, tossing my few belongings into my duffel bag. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds heavy with an impending storm. The whispers were fainter now, but I could feel them brushing against the edges of my thoughts, like cold fingers tracing my skull. By the time I returned to the diner, Hank was waiting by my truck, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded grimly. "She's patched up enough to get you out of here. Drive fast, don't stop." I thanked them both, though my words felt hollow. I climbed into the cab, turned the key, and felt a surge of relief as the engine rumbled to life. I pulled out of the diner lot, tires splashing through puddles left from the night's rain, and pointed the truck toward the highway. But as I drove through the empty streets, I felt it. The weight. The pull. Something behind me pressing against my spine. My gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, and there it was. A figure, tall and thin, its form cloaked in shifting shadows. It stood in the middle of the road, head tilted slightly as if watching me. Even as I accelerated, it didn't move. But I couldn't shake the feeling it was getting closer, inch by inch. I drove faster, the truck groaning beneath me. The trees blurred past, the storm rolling in overhead, lightning cracking the sky into jagged shards of white. I didn't dare stop, didn't dare look back again. Then just as I reached the highway, the truck sputtered. The engine coughed, stuttered, and died. "No," I whispered, slamming my palm against the steering wheel. I turned the key again and again, but it wouldn't catch. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps as I looked around. The road was empty. The trees crowded the edges, dark and menacing. And the whispers returned. "Come see. Come see. I scrambled out of the cab, my bag slung over my shoulder, and began running. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, threading through the branches above me. I could feel them pulling at me, tugging at my limbs. I broke through the tree-line, stumbling into a clearing. At its center stood the hollow tree, the same one from before, though impossibly, it was here, miles from where I'd seen it last. Its twisted branches clawed at the sky, and its hollow yawned wide and dark. And from that hollow the figure emerged. It was taller than I'd imagined, its form stretched thin, almost boneless. Shadows writhed beneath its skin, and its face, if it could be called a face, was a swirling mass of darkness, featureless and empty. It raised a hand, long and clawed, and pointed directly at me. You've seen. Now you belong. My legs gave out and I collapsed to my knees. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, a cacophony of voices pressing against my skull. My vision dimmed, the world tilting and spinning around me. I felt myself slipping as if falling into a pit without end. But then, just as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, I heard another voice. Faint but distinct, cutting through the noise like a blade. Don't listen. Don't follow. It was Millie's voice, echoing in my mind. I seized on it, clinging to that thread of sanity. I forced myself to my feet, shaking off the weight of the whispers. I turned and ran, not looking back, not listening, my breath burning in my throat. I don't remember how I got back to town. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling into the diner, soaked and shivering, Millie's hands on my shoulders as she guided me inside. She didn't speak, just wrapped me in a blanket and poured me a steaming mug of something herbal and bitter. You saw it, she said softly. I nodded, my teeth chattering. The hollow doesn't let go easily, she murmured. But you resisted. That's something. I stared into the mug, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. What do I do now? She glanced out the window where the storm raged and shadows danced just beyond the lamplight. Now, she said quietly, you have to finish what was started. The storm outside raged with a fury that seemed almost unnatural, its howling winds pressing against the windows of the diner like desperate hands. Thunder cracked overhead, the sound rolling through the narrow streets of the town. Inside, I huddled against the corner booth, clutching the warm mug Millie had given me, though the tea did little to calm the tremors coursing through my body. Across from me, Millie sat in silence, her eyes distant, as if watching something only she could see. After what felt like hours, she spoke, her voice low and weighted. The hollow has marked you, but there might still be a way out. I leaned forward, desperation clawing at my throat. How? What do I have to do? She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her own mug. It's an old tale, she said finally. The townsfolk call it the pact. A ritual older than the town itself, tied to the woods and the thing that lives there. A way to trade your mark for something else. I swallowed hard. What does it cost? Millie's eyes met mine, her gaze filled with a sorrow I couldn't quite comprehend. Everything. But it might buy you a chance to leave. I didn't like the sound of that, but the weight of the mark on my skin felt heavier by the hour. The whispers had faded to a low hum, but I knew they were waiting, patient and persistent. Tell me what to do, I said. She nodded reluctantly. You'll need to go back to the woods, to the hollow tree. There's a circle of stones around its base, old stones carved with symbols. You have to step inside the circle and speak the offering. The offering? My voice cracked. It's a prayer of sorts, she explained. But it's not spoken aloud. You have to think it with everything you have while standing inside the circle. It's a trade, you offer something of yourself in return for your freedom. What kind of something? I whispered. Her gaze darkened. It's different for everyone. Some lose their memories. Some lose their faces. Others? She broke off, her voice trembling. You just have to decide if it's worth the price. A chill settled over me, heavier than the storm outside. I thought of my truck, my job, the normal life that was waiting for me beyond this cursed town. But I also thought of the mark beneath my eye, the figure from the hollow, the suffocating weight of the whispers. If I didn't act, I'd be trapped in this nightmare forever. I'll do it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Millie nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line. I'll drive you to the edge of the woods. But from there you're on your own. The drive was short but felt like a lifetime. The storm had begun to break, the rain thinning into a mist that clung to the trees like cobwebs. Millie's old pickup truck bumped along the dirt road, headlights casting long, trembling shadows between the gnarled trunks. Finally, she stopped at the tree line, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Be careful, she said softly. And if you hear the whispers, don't follow them. No matter what. I nodded, forcing myself out of the truck. The air was thick with damp earth and the faint scent of pine. The woods stretched before me, dark and tangled, the path barely discernible beneath the undergrowth. I glanced back once, but Millie was already turning the truck around, disappearing into the mist. I took a deep breath and stepped into the trees. The deeper I went, the more the woods seemed to shift around me. The path twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself, but I kept my eyes ahead, focusing on the faint glow that pulsed between the trees. The whispers grew louder, threading through the branches like smoke, each voice distinct and urgent. "Come closer. We can help you. Just a little further." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but they seeped into my thoughts, curling around my resolve. The hollow tree loomed ahead, its gaping maw darker than the surrounding shadows. Around its base, the stones were arranged in a perfect circle, etched with strange, twisting symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. I stepped into the circle. The air shifted, growing heavier, colder. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, but I forced myself to focus, to think the offering with all my strength. I trade my mark. I trade my mark for freedom. I give what is mine in return for release. The shadows thickened, twisting into shapes just beyond comprehension. The figure from before emerged from the hollow, its form more solid now, its face a swirl of darkness that seemed to draw in the light around it. "What will you offer?" it whispered, though its voice was inside my mind. I gritted my teeth, my fists clenched at my sides. "Take my memories," I thought desperately. "Take the memories of this place, of what I've seen here." The figure hesitated, its swirling face tilting as if considering my offer. Then slowly it nodded. The world shuddered. Pain lanced through my skull, sharp and blinding. I cried out, collapsing to my knees as images tore themselves from my mind. Millie's face, the diner, the mark, the woods, the hollow. All of it ripped away, leaving behind a blank, echoing emptiness. When I opened my eyes, the whispers were gone. The woods were silent, still. The hollow tree was just a tree now, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. I stumbled out of the circle, dazed, disoriented, but free. I made my way back to the edge of the woods, where Millie was waiting, her face tight with worry. She helped me into the truck and we drove back to the town without speaking. Later, sitting in the diner, I realized with a hollow ache that I couldn't remember what had happened in the woods. I couldn't recall the pact I'd made or the price I'd paid. All I knew was that I was leaving the next morning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond the edge of my memory. And when I caught my reflection in the diner window, I saw that the mark beneath my eye was gone. But something darker lingered behind my gaze. The next morning dawned dull and gray, the storm's remnants hanging heavy in the sky. I packed my things into the truck, my movements automatic, mechanical. The diner stood quiet behind me, its neon sign flickering weakly. Millie had said nothing when I'd left, only giving me a nod and a tight smile, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite name. As I started the engine, a strange emptiness settled over me. It wasn't just the missing memories, something deeper gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, something I couldn't grasp. The road stretched out ahead, the woods falling away behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly leaving. I drove for miles, the landscape blurring into a haze of trees and sky, until finally, I saw the familiar landmarks of the interstate. Relief surged through me, brittle and fleeting. I was free. Whatever pact I'd made in those cursed woods, whatever price I'd paid, it had worked. Or so I thought. The first signs came a few days later, after I'd returned to the routine of long hauls and truck stops. I'd catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, a shape, a flicker of movement, but when I turned there was nothing there. The whispers had faded, but now they were replaced by a sense of being watched, a presence that clung to the edges of my vision. One night, parked at a rest stop, I found a scrap of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was old, yellowed, the writing barely legible. "The hollow is patient. It always remembers." I tore it up and threw it away, but the words echoed in my mind long after. A week later, I woke in the middle of the night to find myself standing outside my truck, barefoot on the cold asphalt. I didn't remember leaving my bed. I didn't even remember dreaming. But my hands were streaked with dirt, and there were faint scratches on my arms as if I'd clawed my way through underbrush. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion from too many miles on the road. But deep down I knew better. The presence grew stronger. It wasn't long before I started seeing the mark again. At first, it was just a shadow beneath my eye, a faint smudge that I thought was dirt or a trick of the light. But then it deepened, darkening into the same swirling shape I'd traded away. It stared back at me from every mirror, every window, as if mocking my escape. And with it came the whispers. soft at first, barely perceptible, but growing louder, more insistent. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. You belong to us now. I tried to run, to lose myself in cities and crowds, but no matter where I went, the presence followed. It lingered in the corners of rooms, in the spaces between thoughts. My memories of the woods were gone, but the price I'd paid wasn't forgotten. One night, I returned to my apartment to find my door ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. The lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I stepped inside cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. That's when I saw it. A figure stood in the center of the room, its form indistinct, shifting as if it were made of smoke and darkness. But its face was mine. Or rather, it was a distorted reflection of me, twisted by something inhuman. The eyes were hollow, swirling pits of shadow, and the mark beneath its eye pulsed like a wound. You gave us a piece of yourself, it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. And now we are whole. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. What do you want? The figure tilted its head, its smile widening into something grotesque. To finish the trade. To take what you owe. I stumbled, reaching for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows thickened, curling around me like vines, cold and suffocating. I could feel my mind slipping, the world tilting as if I were falling into a void. Desperation clawed at me. I tried to remember the offering, the ritual, anything that might stop this thing. But my memories were gone, stolen by the pact. All I had left was the mark, and the realization that I had never truly escaped. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was my reflection in the window. The mark beneath my eye was gone, but something else stared back at me. Something hollow. Something waiting. And in the distance, just beyond the edge of thought, the whispers began again. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.